Question 1. A manufacturing facility specializing in advanced composites has identified its significant environmental aspects, including volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions from curing processes, and significant water usage in cleaning operations. The organization is transitioning to ISO 14001-2015 and needs to establish a robust system for monitoring and measuring key operational characteristics. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirements for monitoring and measurement under the standard, considering both performance and compliance? Option A. Primarily focus on recording total monthly energy consumption and waste generation volumes, as these are universally recognized environmental indicators for any industrial process. Option B. Establish specific, quantifiable metrics for VOC emissions per batch processed and water consumed per kilogram of finished product, coupled with regular checks against permitted emission limits and water discharge standards, ensuring monitoring equipment is calibrated according to manufacturer specifications. Option C. Implement a system where operational staff subjectively assess the visible plume from exhaust stacks and the perceived cleanliness of wastewater discharge, without formal calibration of any monitoring equipment. Option D. Rely solely on the annual environmental audit findings to identify any deviations from expected performance, assuming daily operational monitoring is redundant if the audit results are satisfactory. The correct answer is B. Establish specific, quantifiable metrics for VOC emissions per batch processed and water consumed per kilogram of finished product, coupled with regular checks against permitted emission limits and water discharge standards, ensuring monitoring equipment is calibrated according to manufacturer specifications. Explanation. The core principle of monitoring and measuring key characteristics of operations under ISO 14001-2015 involves identifying what needs to be tracked to understand environmental performance and compliance. This requires a systematic approach to determine significant environmental aspects and their associated impacts. The standard emphasizes that organizations must determine what needs monitoring and measuring, the methods for monitoring and measurement, including calibration or verification of monitoring and measuring equipment, as appropriate, when the monitoring and measuring shall be performed, and when the results of monitoring and measuring shall be analyzed and evaluated. The selection of key performance indicators, KPI, is crucial, and these KPIs should directly relate to the organization's significant environmental aspects, legal and other requirements, and its environmental objectives. For instance, if a significant aspect is water usage, a relevant characteristic to monitor would be the volume of water consumed per unit of production. If air emissions are significant, monitoring stack gas concentrations of specific pollutants, e.g., SO2 NOx, would be critical. The chosen characteristics must provide reliable data that allows the organization to assess its environmental performance, identify trends, and make informed decisions regarding its environmental management system. This also includes monitoring compliance with relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act in the United States, or similar regional regulations, ensuring that operational parameters do not lead to non-compliance. The effectiveness of environmental controls and the progress towards environmental objectives are directly evaluated through this monitoring and measurement process. Question 2. When transitioning to an ISO 14001-2015 certified environmental management system, an organization must ensure personnel performing tasks that can cause significant environmental impacts are competent. Which of the following best encapsulates the documented evidence required to demonstrate this competence, considering potential regulatory obligations such as adherence to emissions limits stipulated by the Air Quality Act? Option A. A simple list of employees assigned to environmental roles with their job titles and dates of hire. Option B. Copies of all internal environmental policy documents and a log of daily environmental monitoring readings. Option C. Certificates of attendance for general safety workshops and a personal statement of understanding of environmental principles. Option D. Records of formal education, relevant training courses completed with assessment results, and documented on-the-job experience directly related to environmental responsibilities and regulatory compliance. The correct answer is D. Records of formal education, relevant training courses completed with assessment results, and documented on-the-job experience directly related to environmental responsibilities and regulatory compliance. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001:2015 requires organizations to maintain appropriate records of competence for personnel undertaking tasks that can cause significant environmental impacts. This involves identifying the necessary competencies, providing training or taking other actions to achieve competence, and evaluating the effectiveness of these actions. Records of competence should demonstrate that individuals have the requisite education, training, skills, and experience to effectively manage environmental aspects and implement the Environmental Management System, EMS. This includes evidence of understanding environmental legislation relevant to their roles, such as the Clean Water Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA in the United States, or equivalent national regulations. For instance, an employee responsible for hazardous waste management must have documented training on waste characterization, storage, and disposal procedures, as well as an understanding of reporting requirements under applicable environmental laws. The records should be retained to demonstrate ongoing competence and to support internal audits and external certification. The effectiveness of training can be evaluated through post-training assessments, observation of performance, or feedback from supervisors. Therefore, the most comprehensive approach to maintaining records of competence under ISO 14001:2015 involves a systematic process of identifying needs, addressing them through training or other means, and retaining evidence of both the actions taken and their effectiveness, ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements and the standards clauses on resources and competence. Question 3. Consider a manufacturing facility that has identified the uncontrolled discharge of processed wastewater as a significant environmental aspect. To manage this, they have implemented a new wastewater treatment system and developed standard operating procedures, SOP, for its daily operation, including monitoring of key parameters like pH and suspended solids. During an internal audit, it was noted that while the SOPs are in place, the operators responsible for the treatment system have not received specific refresher training on the updated procedures for the past 2 years, and the monitoring logs show occasional deviations from the target pH range, although these were corrected by operators without formal reporting. Which of the following actions would be the most appropriate response to address the nonconformities identified during the audit? In line with ISO 14001:2015 principles for establishing, implementing, and controlling processes. Option A. Implement a mandatory refresher training program for all wastewater treatment operators covering the current SOPs and emergency response protocols, and establish a procedure for investigating and documenting all monitoring deviations, regardless of immediate correction, to identify trends and potential systemic issues. Option B. Focus solely on upgrading the wastewater treatment technology to eliminate the possibility of pH deviations, as the current system is clearly inadequate based on the audit findings. Option C. Conduct a one-time review of the monitoring logs to confirm that all deviations were eventually corrected, and then close out the audit finding without further action on training or procedural documentation. Option D. Update the wastewater treatment system's SOPs to reflect the operator's current practices, assuming their informal corrections indicate a more efficient, albeit undocumented, process. The correct answer is A. Implement a mandatory refresher training program for all wastewater treatment operators covering the current SOPs and emergency response protocols, and establish a procedure for investigating and documenting all monitoring deviations, regardless of immediate correction, to identify trends and potential systemic issues. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001:2015 requires organizations to establish, implement, and control processes that meet the standards requirements. A critical aspect of this is ensuring that operational controls are effective in managing identified environmental aspects and their associated environmental impacts. When an organization identifies a significant environmental aspect, such as the potential for accidental release of a chemical solvent used in manufacturing, it must establish controls to prevent or mitigate this impact. These controls need to be documented and implemented. For instance, a process for managing hazardous waste would involve specific procedures for storage, labeling, transportation, and disposal, aligning with relevant national or regional waste management regulations. The effectiveness of these controls is then monitored and reviewed. If an incident occurs, like a minor spill that is contained quickly with no off-site impact, the organization must investigate the root cause of the nonconformity and implement corrective actions to prevent recurrence. This investigation would likely involve reviewing the adequacy of the existing operational control procedures, training records, and emergency response plans. The corrective action might involve revising the spill containment procedures, enhancing employee training on handling the solvent, or improving the frequency of equipment inspections. The goal is to ensure that the established processes are robust enough to manage the environmental aspect effectively, and that any deviations lead to learning and improvement, thereby maintaining compliance and enhancing environmental performance. This iterative process of control, monitoring, and improvement is fundamental to the ISO 14001-2015 framework. Question 4. Consider a manufacturing firm that has successfully implemented an ISO 14001-2004 certified environmental management system. Upon transitioning to ISO 14001-2015, the firm must adapt its approach to environmental objectives. Which of the following best describes the foundational requirement for establishing new environmental objectives under the 2015 revision, reflecting the standard's emphasis on strategic integration and risk management? Option A. Objectives must be established considering the organization's context, significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and risks and opportunities, ensuring they are aligned with the strategic direction. Option B. Objectives are to be set based on the most readily available performance data, prioritizing short-term cost savings over long-term environmental impact reduction. Option C. Objectives must be exclusively derived from the findings of the previous year's internal audits and management reviews, without external contextual analysis. Option D. Objectives should primarily focus on achieving compliance with all applicable environmental regulations and permit conditions, with secondary consideration for operational efficiency. The correct answer is A. Objectives must be established considering the organization's context, significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and risks and opportunities, ensuring they are aligned with the strategic direction. Explanation. The core principle of an environmental management system, EMS, under ISO 14001-2015 is the integration of environmental considerations into an organization's operational and strategic processes. This involves establishing an environmental policy, planning for environmental aspects and impacts, implementing operational controls, checking performance, and reviewing the system for continual improvement. The PDCA, Plan Do Check Act, cycle is fundamental to this process. When transitioning to ISO 14001-2015, organizations must ensure their existing environmental practices align with the new requirements, which include a stronger emphasis on context of the organization, leadership commitment, risk-based thinking, and life cycle perspective. The standard also mandates the establishment of objectives and targets, which are crucial for driving performance improvements. These objectives must be measurable, consistent with the environmental policy, and take into account significant environmental aspects and compliance obligations. The process of setting these objectives involves identifying potential environmental impacts, evaluating their significance, and then defining specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART goals to mitigate or manage them. For instance, if an organization identifies air emissions as a significant environmental aspect, a relevant objective might be to reduce specific pollutant emissions by a certain percentage within a defined timeframe, supported by operational controls and monitoring. The commitment to continual improvement ensures that the EMS evolves and remains effective in managing environmental performance over time. Question 5. Which approach most reliably confirms that operational personnel at a chemical processing plant are aware of their specific contributions to the plant's environmental performance and the implications of non-compliance with the environmental management system, as required by ISO 14001-2015? Option A. Distributing a comprehensive awareness training manual and requiring all personnel to sign an acknowledgement form confirming they have read and understood its contents. Option B. Reviewing employee performance appraisals for any mention of environmental performance, assuming this reflects adequate awareness and contribution. Option C. Conducting direct, task-based observations and discussions with personnel to assess their understanding and application of environmental procedures relevant to their roles. Option D, implementing a periodic online quiz that covers the organization's environmental policy and general environmental responsibilities for all employees. The correct answer is C, conducting direct, task-based observations and discussions with personnel to assess their understanding and application of environmental procedures relevant to their roles. Explanation: the effectiveness of an environmental management system, EMS, under ISO 14001, 2015 hinges on ensuring that all personnel performing work under the organization's control are competent. Competence is not solely about formal qualifications, but also about awareness of critical EMS elements. Specifically, Clause 7.3 of ISO 14001, 2015 mandates that relevant persons are aware of the environmental policy, their significant environmental aspects, and associated actual or potential environmental impacts, their contribution to the effectiveness of the EMS, including the benefits of improved environmental performance, and the implications of not conforming with the EMS requirements. The question probes how an organization can best verify that this awareness is embedded across its workforce, particularly for those directly influencing environmental outcomes. A robust method involves assessing their understanding and application of these principles in their daily tasks. This goes beyond simple communication and requires a demonstration of comprehension. For instance, a manufacturing operator's awareness of their role in reducing waste, a significant environmental aspect, and how their actions contribute to the overall environmental performance of the facility is crucial. Similarly, maintenance staff need to understand the potential environmental impacts of spills from equipment they service. Therefore, the most effective verification would involve direct observation and assessment of how individuals integrate EMS principles into their operational duties, thereby confirming their contribution to the system's effectiveness. This practical application is a more definitive measure of awareness than passive methods like quizzes or policy acknowledgments, which do not guarantee understanding or behavioral change. Question 6. When transitioning to an ISO 14001, 2015 compliant environmental management system, a manufacturing firm operating in a region with evolving environmental regulations, such as anticipated stricter controls on volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions, and increased producer responsibility for end-of-life product management, must first establish a comprehensive understanding of its context. Which of the following activities most directly addresses the requirement to understand the organization and its context, specifically concerning external issues related to legal and regulatory frameworks? Option A, developing a new set of key performance indicators, KPI, for environmental monitoring and reporting, aligned with the organization's strategic business goals. Option B, conducting a detailed analysis of current and emerging national and regional environmental laws and directives impacting its operations and products, including their potential future implications. Option C, performing a thorough review of the company's historical environmental performance data to identify trends and patterns in resource consumption and waste generation. Option D, engaging in a series of internal workshops to gauge employee awareness and understanding of the organization's environmental policy and its commitment to sustainability. The correct answer is B, conducting a detailed analysis of current and emerging national and regional environmental laws and directives impacting its operations and products, including their potential future implications. Explanation: the core of understanding an organization and its context, as required by ISO 14001-2015 Clause 4.1, involves identifying external and internal issues relevant to the organization's purpose and its strategic direction that can affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its environmental management system. This process is foundational for establishing the scope of the EMS and for setting environmental objectives. External issues can include the socio-cultural, political, legal, economic, technological, and environmental landscape in which the organization operates. For instance, changes in environmental legislation, such as stricter emission standards or new waste management regulations, e.g., EU directives on circular economy or national pollutant release inventories, are critical external issues. Internal issues relate to the organization's governance, culture, knowledge, processes, and resources. Understanding these issues allows the organization to anticipate potential environmental impacts, opportunities, and risks, and to determine the needs and expectations of interested parties. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 places a strong emphasis on this strategic alignment, ensuring that the EMS is integrated into the organization's overall business strategy. Therefore, identifying and understanding the legal and regulatory framework, including upcoming or anticipated changes in environmental law, is a crucial component of understanding the organization's context and ensuring the effectiveness and compliance of its environmental management system. Question 7. Consider a mid-sized manufacturing firm, Innovate Tech, specializing in advanced polymers, that is transitioning to ISO 14001-2015. They have identified significant water consumption as an environmental aspect, with a compliance obligation stemming from the local water abstraction licensing regulations. Analysis of their operational context reveals potential impacts from regional drought conditions, which are becoming more frequent due to climate change, and also an emerging market demand for products manufactured using water-efficient processes. What is the most comprehensive approach Innovate Tech should adopt to address the risks and opportunities associated with its water consumption aspect in line with ISO 14001-2015 principles? Option A. Develop a strategy to reduce water consumption by 15% within 2 years, investigate water recycling technologies, and engage with local water authorities to understand future regulatory changes, while also exploring marketing initiatives that highlight their water stewardship. Option B. Allocate a budget for potential fines related to water usage exceeding permissible limits and conduct a one-time assessment of water consumption to identify the largest users within the facility. Option C. Immediately cease all water usage in production processes and investigate alternative non-water-based manufacturing methods to eliminate the compliance risk entirely. Option D. Focus solely on ensuring compliance with current water abstraction licensing regulations by maintaining accurate records and paying all associated fees, without exploring reduction or efficiency measures. The correct answer is A. Develop a strategy to reduce water consumption by 15% within 2 years, investigate water recycling technologies, and engage with local water authorities to understand future regulatory changes, while also exploring marketing initiatives that highlight their water stewardship. Explanation. The core of determining risks and opportunities in an ISO 14001-2015 transition involves a systematic analysis of internal and external issues, compliance obligations, and the organization's environmental aspects. The standard requires consideration of these elements to identify potential negative impacts, risks, and positive outcomes, opportunities, that could affect the environmental management system's ability to achieve its intended results. For instance, an organization manufacturing electronic components might identify an environmental aspect of hazardous waste generation. A risk associated with this could be noncompliance with the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment (WEEE) directive, leading to fines and reputational damage. Conversely, an opportunity could be to develop a closed-loop recycling process for its electronic waste, reducing disposal costs and potentially creating a new revenue stream or enhancing its eco-friendly brand image. The process of identifying these risks and opportunities is not static. It requires ongoing review and adaptation as internal and external contexts change. This proactive approach underpins the Plan Do Check Act cycle and is crucial for achieving environmental objectives and improving environmental performance. The standard emphasizes that these risks and opportunities should inform the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the environmental management system. Question 8. Following the successful transition of an organization's environmental management system to the ISO 14001-2015 standard, what is the primary objective when conducting periodic internal assessments to verify the system's ongoing effectiveness and suitability? Option A. To confirm that the documented procedures are consistently applied and that the system adequately addresses identified environmental aspects and legal obligations, thereby supporting continuous improvement. Option B. To ensure that all employees have memorized the entire text of the new ISO 2015 standard and can recite it accurately. Option C, to generate a comprehensive report detailing all minor deviations from the previous ISO 14001-2004 system for management review. Option D, to primarily focus on identifying opportunities for cost reduction through the elimination of redundant environmental monitoring activities. The correct answer is A, to confirm that the documented procedures are consistently applied and that the system adequately addresses identified environmental aspects and legal obligations, thereby supporting continuous improvement. Explanation. The question probes the fundamental principle of ensuring the ongoing effectiveness and suitability of an environmental management system, EMS, in the context of ISO 14001-2015 transition. A critical component of maintaining an effective EMS is the periodic verification of its operational performance and alignment with evolving environmental aspects, legal requirements, and organizational objectives. This verification process is not merely about checking compliance, but about confirming that the system actively contributes to achieving environmental performance improvements and fulfilling commitments. The transition phase, in particular, necessitates a robust evaluation to ensure that the updated system, reflecting the 2015 standards requirements, is functioning as intended and remains capable of meeting its environmental policy and objectives. This involves assessing whether the documented procedures are being followed, whether the identified environmental aspects are still relevant and managed effectively, and whether the established controls are preventing or mitigating environmental impacts. Furthermore, it involves confirming that the system is adaptable to changes in legislation, such as new emission standards or waste disposal regulations, and that the organization's capacity to respond to environmental incidents is maintained. The correct option reflects this proactive and comprehensive approach to system assurance, ensuring its continued relevance and efficacy. Question 9. Consider an environmental manager at a manufacturing facility that produces electronic components. This facility is subject to stringent local regulations regarding wastewater discharge and air emissions, as well as the overarching requirements of ISO 14001-2015. The environmental manager is tasked with developing and implementing a new training program for the operational staff who handle chemicals and manage waste streams, aiming to improve compliance and reduce environmental incidents, which approach best aligns with the competence requirements outlined in ISO 14001-2015, Clause 7. 2. When ensuring the staff are capable of performing their environmental responsibilities effectively and safely. Option A. Delegate the responsibility for assessing and developing staff competence entirely to the Human Resources Department, without direct input from the environmental management team regarding specific environmental knowledge and skills. Option B. Conduct a gap analysis of current staff knowledge against identified environmental risks and regulatory obligations, followed by targeted training based on the identified deficiencies, and subsequently evaluate the training's impact on reducing nonconformities and improving environmental performance indicators. Option C. Rely solely on the previous environmental training provided when the facility initially obtained ISO 14001 certification, assuming staff competency has been maintained through on-the-job experience. Option D. Implement a generic environmental awareness training for all employees, without specific modules addressing the unique chemical handling and waste management tasks performed by the operational staff. The correct answer is B. Conduct a gap analysis of current staff knowledge against identified environmental risks and regulatory obligations, followed by targeted training based on the identified deficiencies, and subsequently evaluate the training's impact on reducing nonconformities and improving environmental performance indicators. Explanation. The question pertains to the requirements of ISO 14001-2015, specifically Clause 7, 1, 2, which addresses competence. This clause mandates that an organization shall determine the necessary competence of persons doing work under its control that affects its environmental performance and takes action to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. This includes ensuring that personnel involved in environmental monitoring, regulatory compliance reporting, and the implementation of environmental programs possess the requisite knowledge and skills. For instance, An individual responsible for conducting internal audits of the environmental management system must demonstrate understanding of ISO 14001, 2015 requirements, relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act in the United States, or similar national/regional environmental laws, and the organization's specific environmental aspects and impacts. The organization must ensure that these individuals are competent through appropriate education, training, or experience. The evaluation of effectiveness is crucial to confirm that the acquired competence leads to the desired outcomes in environmental performance and compliance. Question 10. When a chemical manufacturing firm is transitioning to ISO 14001, 2015, and introducing a novel synthesis process for a specialty polymer, what initial step in the environmental management system's development is most critical for ensuring a robust and compliant framework that considers the full spectrum of potential environmental consequences, as mandated by the standard's emphasis on life cycle thinking and proactive risk management? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment to identify environmental aspects and impacts from raw material acquisition through to end-of-life disposal of the polymer. Option B. Documenting all applicable environmental regulations and permits related to chemical synthesis and ensuring operational adherence. Option C. Establishing immediate operational controls for air emissions and wastewater discharge based on preliminary process design parameters. Option D. Developing an emergency preparedness and response plan, specifically for potential chemical spills during the synthesis process. Correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment to identify environmental aspects and impacts from raw material acquisition through to end-of-life disposal of the polymer. Explanation. The core principle tested here is the proactive identification and management of environmental aspects and impacts, a fundamental tenet of ISO 14001-2015. Specifically, the standard emphasizes that an organization must determine its environmental aspects associated with its activities, products, and services that it can control and influence, and their significant environmental impacts. The transition to the 2015 version places greater emphasis on the life cycle perspective. Therefore, when evaluating a new manufacturing process, the environmental management system must consider not only the direct operational impacts but also upstream, e.g., raw material extraction, transportation, and downstream, e.g., product use, end-of-life disposal phases. This holistic view is crucial for comprehensive environmental risk assessment and management. The chosen option reflects this life cycle thinking by incorporating raw material sourcing and waste management from the outset, which are critical elements for identifying potential significant environmental impacts beyond the immediate manufacturing floor. Other options, while related to environmental management, do not fully encompass the life cycle perspective mandated by the 2015 revision for new process introductions. For instance, focusing solely on operational emissions overlooks upstream impacts, and concentrating only on compliance with existing regulations might miss opportunities for pollution prevention or resource efficiency identified through a broader life cycle assessment. The emphasis on establishing controls for identified impacts and ensuring legal compliance are necessary steps, but the initial identification process must be the most comprehensive. Question 11. Consider a manufacturing firm, Innovatech Solutions, which is undergoing its transition to ISO 14001-2015. The firm has identified a significant opportunity related to its waste management practices, the potential to recover valuable materials from its industrial byproducts, thereby reducing both disposal costs and the need for virgin raw materials. In planning actions to address this opportunity, as mandated by Clause 6.1 of ISO 14001-2015, which of the following approaches best exemplifies the integration and implementation of this identified opportunity within the environmental management system? Option A. Developing a pilot program for material recovery, establishing specific performance indicators for recovery rates and cost savings, and integrating the monitoring of these indicators into the existing operational review meetings, with a plan to scale up successful pilot initiatives based on feasibility studies and market demand analysis. Option B. Implementing a new accounting system to track all waste-related expenditures, allocating a fixed budget for waste management improvements without specific targets for material recovery, and updating the environmental aspect register to simply list waste recovery as a potential improvement area. Option C. Engaging a third-party consultant to perform an environmental audit focused solely on waste streams, receiving a report with recommendations, and filing the report in the company's document control system for future reference without immediate action plans. Option D. Conducting a one-time workshop for all employees on the benefits of waste reduction and recycling, distributing informational flyers about proper waste segregation, and updating the environmental policy to include a general statement on resource efficiency. The correct answer is A. Developing a pilot program for material recovery, establishing specific performance indicators for recovery rates and cost savings, and integrating the monitoring of these indicators into the existing operational review meetings, with a plan to scale up successful pilot initiatives based on feasibility studies and market demand analysis. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001-2015 requires organizations to proactively identify and plan actions to address risks and opportunities related to their environmental aspects. Clause 6. 1. Actions to address risks and opportunities mandates that an organization shall determine the risks and opportunities related to its environmental aspects, its other interested party requirements, and its context, such that the environmental management system can achieve its intended outcomes. These risks and opportunities must be addressed by planning actions to integrate them into the environmental management system and implement them throughout the system. Specifically, the standard requires planning how to integrate and implement these actions and how to evaluate their effectiveness. This planning process is not about a single, isolated action, but rather a systematic approach that considers the entire life cycle of products and services, potential environmental impacts, compliance obligations, and stakeholder expectations. The identified risks and opportunities inform the establishment of environmental objectives and the processes needed to achieve them, ensuring that the EMS is robust and capable of preventing or mitigating undesirable environmental impacts and capitalizing on beneficial ones. The effectiveness of these planned actions is then evaluated as part of the ongoing monitoring and review processes within the EMS. Question 12. Consider a chemical manufacturing plant that has recently transitioned to ISO 14001-2015. During the process of identifying environmental aspects and impacts, the team evaluates their wastewater discharge. They note that the discharge contains trace amounts of heavy metals and organic compounds. The local municipal wastewater treatment plant is equipped to handle typical domestic sewage, but has limited capacity to effectively remove these specific industrial contaminants. This situation presents a challenge in determining the significance of the environmental aspect. Which of the following best reflects the approach an organization should take in assessing the significance of this wastewater discharge aspect under ISO 14001-2015? Option A. Evaluate the potential for the trace contaminants to exceed local environmental quality standards or cause adverse effects on the receiving water body, considering the limitations of the municipal treatment facility and the potential for bioaccumulation. Option B. Prioritize aspects related to energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, as these are universally recognized as the most significant environmental impacts for manufacturing facilities, and relegate wastewater to a secondary consideration. Option C. Primarily focus on the volume of wastewater discharged, as this is a direct measure of the physical interaction with the environment, and assume the municipal treatment plant will mitigate any contaminant-related issues. Option D. Assign a low significance to the aspect solely because the concentrations of heavy metals and organic compounds are below the organization's own internal process control limits, regardless of external environmental factors. The correct answer is A. Evaluate the potential for the trace contaminants to exceed local environmental quality standards or cause adverse effects on the receiving water body, considering the limitations of the municipal treatment facility and the potential for bioaccumulation. Explanation: the core of identifying environmental aspects and their associated impacts within an ISO 14001-2015 framework involves a systematic approach that considers the organization's interactions with its environment. An environmental aspect is an element of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. An environmental impact is any change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partially resulting from an organization's environmental aspects. Clause 6, 1, 2 of ISO 14001, 2015 specifically mandates that an organization shall determine the environmental aspects of its activities, products, and services that it can control, and those that it can influence, and their associated environmental impacts. When determining environmental aspects, the organization must consider normal operating conditions, foreseeable emergency situations, and abnormal operating conditions. It also requires considering those aspects that have or can have a significant environmental impact. The determination of significance is a crucial step, often involving criteria established by the organization itself, which may include regulatory compliance, severity, frequency, and scale of the impact. For instance, the emission of volatile organic compounds, VOC, from a painting process is an environmental aspect. The resulting air pollution, potentially leading to respiratory issues in the local community or contributing to smog formation, is the environmental impact. Similarly, the consumption of water in a manufacturing process is an aspect, and the depletion of local water resources or increased strain on municipal water infrastructure is an impact. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 emphasizes a life cycle perspective, meaning that the organization should consider the environmental aspects and impacts associated with all stages of its products and services, from raw material acquisition through design, production, use, and end-of-life treatment. This comprehensive view ensures that potential environmental burdens are identified and managed proactively. The process is iterative and requires ongoing review as operations change or new information becomes available. Question 13. Consider a scenario where a manufacturing facility is transitioning to ISO 14001, 2015, and plans to introduce a new process involving the use of a specific industrial solvent. To ensure compliance with the standards requirements for competence, what is the most comprehensive and effective approach for the organization to determine and assure the competency of personnel involved in handling this solvent, especially in light of potential environmental impacts and regulatory obligations like those under TSCA? Option A. Mandate that all personnel handling the solvent attend a single, generic environmental health and safety seminar provided by an external contractor, without specific validation of individual understanding or practical application. Option B. Conduct a brief online awareness session on environmental safety, assuming that the primary responsibility for safe handling lies with the solvent supplier's material safety data sheet, MSDS. Option C. Rely on the general experience of employees who have previously worked with similar chemicals, assuming their existing skills are transferable and sufficient for the new solvent. Option D. Establish specific job role competency matrices that detail required knowledge of solvent properties, safe handling protocols, spill containment, emergency response, and waste disposal procedures, followed by targeted training and competency validation through practical assessments and documented experience reviews. The correct answer is D. Establish specific job role competency matrices that detail required knowledge of solvent properties, safe handling protocols, spill containment, emergency response, and waste disposal procedures, followed by targeted training and competency validation through practical assessments and documented experience reviews. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001, 2015 requires a robust approach to ensuring personnel competence. Clause 7. 2. Competence mandates that the organization determine the necessary competence for persons performing work under its control that affects its environmental performance or its environmental management system. This involves identifying the required knowledge and skills, ensuring these persons are competent on the basis of education, training, or experience, and taking actions to acquire the necessary competence, evaluating the effectiveness of actions taken, and retaining documented information as evidence of competence. When considering the implementation of a new chemical handling procedure, the organization must first identify the specific environmental risks associated with the chemicals involved, such as potential for spills, emissions, or improper disposal. Based on these risks, the necessary competence for personnel handling these chemicals needs to be defined. This includes understanding the chemical properties, safe handling techniques, emergency response procedures, and relevant regulatory requirements, like those stipulated by the EPA's Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) for hazardous waste management. The organization then needs to assess existing staff capabilities against these defined requirements. If gaps are identified, targeted training programs must be developed and delivered. The effectiveness of this training should be evaluated through methods such as practical demonstrations, knowledge assessments, or observation of work performance. Finally, records of training, assessments, and experience must be maintained to demonstrate that personnel are indeed competent to perform their tasks related to the new procedure, thereby fulfilling the requirements of the standard and ensuring effective environmental protection. Question 14. A manufacturing company, Etha Dynamics, is transitioning to ISO 14001:2015. They have identified several stakeholder groups including local residents concerned about water quality, national environmental protection agencies setting discharge limits, and their primary supplier who requires adherence to specific sustainable sourcing practices. The company's new production process involves a novel chemical solvent with potential for airborne particulate emissions, which local residents are unaware of, but the Environmental Protection Agency is monitoring through existing air quality regulations. Which of the following best represents the determination of relevant requirements for Etha Dynamics' environmental management system in this transition phase? Option A. Addressing only the concerns of local residents regarding water quality, as this is a direct community impact, and considering the supplier's requirements only if they align with existing operational efficiencies, while ignoring the potential impact of the new solvent's emissions due to a lack of explicit stakeholder communication about it. Option B. Prioritizing only the explicit requirements communicated by the National Environmental Protection Agency, as these are legally enforceable and directly related to environmental compliance, while deferring consideration of resident concerns and supplier demands until after the certification audit. Option C. Documenting the supplier's sustainable sourcing practices as the sole relevant requirement, as this directly influences the supply chain and has a clear business impact, disregarding other stakeholder inputs to streamline the transition process. Option D. Focusing on all stated concerns from local residents, the Environmental Protection Agency's legally binding discharge limits, and the supplier's sustainable sourcing mandates, while also proactively investigating the potential impact of the new solvents, particulate emissions on local air quality, and incorporating any identified regulatory or significant environmental concerns into the EMS. The correct answer is D. Focusing on all stated concerns from local residents, the Environmental Protection Agency's legally binding discharge limits, and the supplier's sustainable sourcing mandates, while also proactively investigating the potential impact of the new solvents, particulate emissions on local air quality, and incorporating any identified regulatory or significant environmental concerns into the EMS. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001:2015 requires organizations to identify interested parties and their relevant requirements. Relevant requirements are those that an organization has, or chooses to have, that can affect or be affected by the organization's environmental performance. This identification process is crucial for establishing the scope of the environmental management system and for determining which requirements need to be incorporated into the system. For example, a local community group might have an expectation that an industrial facility minimizes noise pollution, which is a relevant requirement that the organization must consider. Similarly, regulatory bodies will have legally binding requirements concerning emissions, which are also relevant. The standard emphasizes that not all requirements of all interested parties are necessarily relevant to the environmental management system. The organization must determine which of these requirements are relevant by considering their potential to impact environmental performance or be impacted by the organization's activities, products, and services. This determination informs the development of environmental objectives and the overall strategy for environmental management. The process involves understanding the potential environmental aspects and impacts, and then mapping these to the needs and expectations of stakeholders who have an interest in those aspects. Question 15. A manufacturing firm transitioning to ISO 14001:2015 has identified a significant environmental aspect related to its wastewater discharge, which is currently compliant with local regulations, but could be further improved. The organization's environmental policy commits to pollution prevention and continuous improvement. To effectively implement and maintain an improved wastewater treatment process, what is the most critical consideration for ensuring the availability of resources as per ISO 14001-2015? Option A. Securing dedicated financial allocations and qualified personnel for the operational and maintenance requirements of the upgraded treatment system. Option B. Conducting an initial environmental review to identify all potential environmental aspects, regardless of their significance. Option C. Establishing a communication plan to inform stakeholders about the planned improvements to the wastewater treatment process. Option D. Documenting the environmental policy and objectives related to wastewater improvement in the Management System Manual. The correct answer is A. Securing dedicated financial allocations and qualified personnel for the operational and maintenance requirements of the upgraded treatment system. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 necessitates a thorough understanding of how to ensure the availability of resources to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the environmental management system. Clause 7. 1 of the standard resources specifically addresses this. It requires the organization to determine and provide the necessary resources for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, continual improvement, and the overall effectiveness of the environmental management system. This encompasses human resources, infrastructure e.g., buildings, equipment, IT, technology, and financial resources. The organization must also consider any legal or other requirements that might influence resource provision. For instance, if a new environmental regulation, such as stricter emissions limits under the Clean Air Act, requires the installation of new abatement technology, the organization must ensure it has the financial capital, skilled personnel, and appropriate infrastructure to implement and maintain this technology. Simply having a policy is insufficient. The organization must demonstrate that it has allocated and made available the actual resources needed to achieve its environmental objectives and comply with its environmental policy and legal obligations. Therefore, a proactive approach to identifying resource needs, securing funding, training staff, and maintaining equipment is crucial for a successful transition and ongoing compliance. Question 16. Consider a multinational corporation, Ethelstan Industries, which manufactures advanced composite materials for the aerospace sector. They are transitioning to ISO 14001-2015 and are in the process of defining the scope of their EMS. Ethelstan Industries operates multiple manufacturing facilities across different continents, engages in extensive research and development, and sources raw materials globally. They are also increasingly focused on the end-of-life management of their products due to emerging circular economy regulations in key markets. Which of the following considerations is most critical and foundational when determining the scope of Ethelstan Industries' environmental management system under ISO 14001-2015? Option A. The operational boundaries of their most significant manufacturing facility, which accounts for the largest volume of production and direct emissions. Option B. Stated environmental policy and the expectations of their primary aerospace clients regarding supply chain sustainability. Option C. The specific environmental permits and licenses required for each of their global manufacturing sites, as dictated by local environmental protection agencies. Option D. The full life cycle of the composite materials they produce, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal or recycling. The correct answer is D. The full life cycle of the composite materials they produce, from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal or recycling. Explanation. The scope of an environmental management system, EMS, defines the boundaries and applicability of the EMS within an organization. According to ISO 14001-2015, Clause 4.3, the organization shall determine the boundaries of the EMS by considering its external and internal issues relevant to its purpose and strategic direction, and the requirements of interested parties. Crucially, the scope must also consider the products and services of the organization. This means that the environmental aspects associated with the entire life cycle of the products and services the organization offers, from design and production to delivery, use, and end-of-life treatment, must be considered when defining the scope, while regulatory compliance, external issues, and stakeholder expectations interested parties are vital inputs, they are not the sole determinants of the scope. The scope is an internal decision based on a comprehensive understanding of the organization's operations, products, services, and their associated environmental impacts. Therefore, including the life cycle of products and services is a fundamental component that directly influences the boundaries and effectiveness of the EMS. Question 17. Consider a manufacturing facility that has implemented enhanced wastewater treatment processes as a corrective action following a nonconformity related to exceeding permitted discharge limits for heavy metals, as stipulated by local environmental regulations. The organization's environmental objectives include a 15% reduction in heavy metal discharge within 1 year. After 6 months, internal audits reveal that while the new treatment system is operational, the average concentration of lead in the effluent has only decreased by 8% compared to the baseline. The audit also noted inconsistent calibration of monitoring equipment used for effluent analysis. What is the most appropriate next step for the organization to effectively evaluate and improve the outcome of its corrective action? Option A. Conduct a root cause analysis of the nonconformity and the corrective action implementation, focusing on the calibration issues and potential inefficiencies in the treatment process, and revise the action plan accordingly. Option B. Immediately invest in a more advanced and expensive tertiary treatment technology to guarantee compliance with discharge limits. Option C. Report the partial improvement to the regulatory authority and request an extension for achieving the environmental objective, without further investigation into the performance gap. Option D. Conclude that the current corrective action is insufficient and focus solely on increasing the frequency of effluent monitoring to detect future exceedances. Correct answer is A. Conduct a root cause analysis of the nonconformity and the corrective action implementation, focusing on the calibration issues and potential inefficiencies in the treatment process, and revise the action plan accordingly. Explanation. The effectiveness of actions taken to address environmental aspects and impacts, particularly in the context of transitioning to ISO 14001-2015, is evaluated through a systematic process. This process involves monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation of performance against established objectives and targets. Clause 6. 1. One of the standard requires an organization to determine what needs to be done to achieve its environmental objectives and to implement controls to manage its environmental aspects. Clause 9. 1. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation specifies that the organization shall determine what needs to be monitored and measured. The methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation needed to ensure valid results, when the monitoring and measurement shall be performed, and when the results shall be analyzed and evaluated. This ensures that the implemented actions are actually leading to the desired environmental improvements, and that the management system is functioning as intended. The evaluation focuses on whether the actions are reducing environmental impacts, achieving legal compliance, and contributing to the organization's overall environmental policy and objectives. This includes assessing the efficiency and efficacy of the controls and identifying areas for further improvement. The core of evaluating effectiveness lies in comparing the actual outcomes with the planned outcomes, considering both quantitative data, e.g., reduced emissions, waste generation, and qualitative feedback, e.g., stakeholder perceptions, operational efficiency. Question 18. Consider a manufacturing company, Veridian Dynamics, which has recently transitioned its environmental management system to ISO 14001-2015. The company has identified wastewater discharge quality as a significant environmental aspect, with a specific compliance obligation related to the local municipal wastewater treatment plant's permissible limits for chemical oxygen demand. COD. Veridian Dynamics' environmental policy commits to pollution prevention and continuous improvement. Which of the following actions best exemplifies the establishment of a relevant environmental objective at a functional level, aligning with the ISO 14001-2015 requirements for this aspect? Option A. To implement enhanced employee training programs focused on proper waste segregation and spill prevention techniques to foster a greater environmental awareness across all departments. Option B. To reduce the average daily COD concentration in the facility's effluent discharge by 15% within the next fiscal year, as measured against the baseline established in the previous quarter, and to ensure all discharges consistently remain below the local regulatory limit of 250 mg/L. Option C. To investigate the feasibility of installing advanced wastewater treatment technologies that could potentially achieve zero discharge of pollutants. Option D. To conduct a comprehensive review of all chemical inputs used in production processes to identify potential substitutes that are less harmful to the environment. Correct answer is B. To reduce the average daily COD concentration in the facility's effluent discharge by 15% within the next fiscal year, as measured against the baseline established in the previous quarter, and to ensure all discharges consistently remain below the local regulatory limit of 250 mg/L. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001:2015 mandates the establishment of environmental objectives at relevant functions and levels within an organization. These objectives must be measurable, where practicable, and aligned with the organization's environmental policy and significant environmental aspects. Clause 6. 2. Environmental objectives and planning to achieve them is central to this requirement. When establishing these objectives, an organization must consider its significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, such as National Environmental Protection Acts or local discharge permits, and the views of interested parties. Furthermore, the objectives should be communicated and monitored, and the organization must determine what is needed to achieve them, including resources, responsibilities, and timelines. The process involves a thorough review of the current environmental performance, strategic direction, and regulatory landscape. For instance, if an organization identifies energy consumption as a significant environmental aspect, a relevant objective might be to reduce electricity usage by a specific percentage within a defined time frame, supported by initiatives like energy-efficient lighting upgrades or process optimization. This objective must be specific, actionable, and contribute to the overall environmental performance improvement, as outlined in the environmental policy. The standard emphasizes that objectives should be consistent with the environmental policy and that progress should be reviewed. Question 19. An organization transitioning to ISO 14001:2015 has diligently implemented its environmental policy and established operational controls for its identified significant environmental aspects. During a scheduled management review, the internal audit report highlighted a recurring pattern of minor noncompliance with a specific local wastewater discharge regulation, despite consistent monitoring data falling within the permitted range. Furthermore, the company's strategic objective to reduce water consumption by 15% has not shown significant progress over the last 2 review periods, with actual reductions only reaching 5%. Considering the intent of ISO 14001:2015 to ensure the continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS, which of the following actions best reflects the outcome of this review concerning these findings? Option A. Update the environmental policy to reflect the current water consumption performance and disregard the minor wastewater discharge noncompliance as it falls within the permitted range. Option B. Focus solely on improving the internal audit process to prevent future reporting of minor noncompliances, assuming the operational controls are inherently effective. Option C. Classify the wastewater discharge as a non-significant environmental aspect and postpone any further review of water consumption reduction strategies until the next strategic planning cycle. Option D. Initiate a root cause analysis for the wastewater discharge noncompliance, review the effectiveness of water consumption reduction initiatives, and update the EMS to address any identified gaps in controls or resource allocation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a root cause analysis for the wastewater discharge noncompliance, review the effectiveness of water consumption reduction initiatives, and update the EMS to address any identified gaps in controls or resource allocation. Explanation: the review of an environmental management system, EMS, at planned intervals, as stipulated by ISO 14001:2015 Clause 9. 3. Management review is a critical process. This review ensures the EMS remains suitable, adequate, and effective in achieving its intended outcomes. Suitability refers to the alignment of the EMS with the organization's environmental policy and objectives, considering changes in its context. Adequacy means the EMS possesses the necessary resources, processes, and controls to manage environmental aspects and impacts. Effectiveness pertains to the EMS's ability to deliver the desired environmental performance improvements and meet compliance obligations. The management review process involves evaluating information on the performance of the EMS, including trends in environmental aspects, compliance obligations, nonconformities and corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, audit results, and the performance of external providers. It also considers opportunities for improvement and changes that could affect the EMS. Based on this comprehensive evaluation, management determines whether the EMS continues to meet the organization's needs and objectives, and if any changes are required to maintain its suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. This cyclical review process is fundamental to the Plan Do Check Act methodology embedded within ISO 14001:2015. Question 20. An industrial conglomerate, Ether Dynamics, is undergoing a transition to ISO 14001:2015. Their operations span multiple countries, each with distinct environmental legislation, such as the European Union's REACH regulation impacting chemical usage and the United States Clean Air Act governing emissions. Internally, Ether Dynamics faces challenges with inconsistent waste management practices across its subsidiaries and a recent surge in employee-led environmental initiatives demanding greater transparency. Considering these factors and the requirements of ISO 14001:2015 Clause 4, what is the most critical initial step for Ether Dynamics to effectively establish the context of their organization? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive stakeholder analysis to identify all relevant internal and external parties and their environmental concerns, alongside a thorough review of applicable national and international environmental legislation impacting their diverse operations. Option B. Implementing a proactive risk management framework to identify and mitigate potential environmental liabilities, focusing on the most financially impactful risks to the company's bottom line. Option C. Developing a detailed list of all potential environmental aspects and impacts, prioritizing those with the most significant environmental consequences based on initial operational assessments. Option D. Establishing a robust internal communication plan to disseminate the new environmental policy and objectives to all employees, ensuring buy-in and awareness across all levels of the organization. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive stakeholder analysis to identify all relevant internal and external parties and their environmental concerns, alongside a thorough review of applicable national and international environmental legislation impacting their diverse operations. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001:2015 mandates a thorough understanding of the organization's context, as detailed in Clause 4. This involves identifying external and internal issues relevant to the organization's purpose and its strategic direction that can affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its environmental management system. External issues can include the legal and regulatory framework, technological advancements, market conditions, and socio-cultural aspects. Internal issues encompass the organization's governance, culture, resources, and operational processes. Crucially, the standard requires determining interested parties relevant to the environmental management system and their requirements. Interested parties are individuals or groups that have an interest in or can be affected by the organization's environmental performance. Examples include regulators, customers, employees, local communities, and shareholders. The organization must determine which of these interested parties' requirements are relevant to the environmental management system and how to address them. This comprehensive analysis of context and interested parties forms the foundation for establishing the scope of the environmental management system and defining environmental policy and objectives. Without this foundational understanding, the environmental management system risks being misaligned with the organization's strategic goals and unable to effectively manage its environmental aspects and impacts. Question 21. When establishing the communication requirements for an environmental management system under ISO 14001:2015, what fundamental aspect must be considered to ensure the effectiveness of both internal and external communication channels regarding environmental performance and compliance? Option A. The historical communication methods used in previous environmental initiatives, regardless of their success. Option B. The context of the organization, including its environmental aspects, legal obligations, and the concerns of interested parties. Option C. The number of employees within the organization and their perceived level of environmental awareness. Option D. The availability of advanced communication technologies and the organization's budget for communication infrastructure. Correct answer is B. The context of the organization, including its environmental aspects, legal obligations, and the concerns of interested parties. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 requires an organization to establish effective communication processes for its environmental management system. This includes determining what to communicate, when to communicate, with whom to communicate, how to communicate, and who is responsible for communicating. Crucially, the standard mandates that the organization shall determine the need for internal and external communications relevant to the environmental management system. This determination must consider its environmental aspects, performance, legal and other requirements, and the concerns of interested parties. The communication process must ensure that relevant environmental information is communicated within the organization at all levels and functions, and that external communication regarding its environmental aspects and environmental management system is managed. The effectiveness of these communication processes is a key element in achieving the environmental objectives and improving environmental performance. Therefore, a robust system for internal and external communication, informed by the organization's context and stakeholder expectations, is essential for successful ISO 14001-2015 implementation and maintenance. Question 22. Consider an industrial facility that manufactures specialized coatings. During the transition to ISO 14001-2015, the environmental team identifies the storage and handling of volatile organic compounds, VOC, as a significant environmental aspect. What specific consideration is most critical for the organization to address under the Actions to Address Risks and Opportunities clause when contemplating the potential negative environmental consequences of this aspect? Option A. Developing a detailed communication plan for stakeholders regarding the company's overall commitment to reducing its carbon footprint. Option B. Conducting a thorough life cycle assessment of all coating products to identify all potential environmental impacts from raw material extraction to end-of-life disposal. Option C. Establishing comprehensive emergency response protocols for accidental releases of VOCs, including containment, cleanup, and reporting procedures aligned with national environmental protection regulations. Option D. Implementing a new waste segregation system for all non-hazardous production byproducts to improve recycling rates. Correct answer is C. Establishing comprehensive emergency response protocols for accidental releases of VOCs, including containment, cleanup, and reporting procedures aligned with national environmental protection regulations. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 mandates a proactive approach to addressing potential negative environmental consequences arising from an organization's activities, products, and services. This requirement, detailed in Clause 6.1.1, Actions to Address Risks and Opportunities, specifically calls for identifying and evaluating the environmental aspects of the organization. For each identified significant environmental aspect, the organization must determine the potential negative environmental consequences that could arise if it is not controlled or managed effectively. This involves considering both normal operating conditions and foreseeable emergency situations. The standard emphasizes the need to plan actions to address these potential consequences. For instance, if an organization identifies the use of a hazardous chemical as a significant environmental aspect, it must consider the potential consequences of a spill, such as soil and water contamination, impact on local biodiversity, and potential human health risks. The organization's environmental management system must then establish controls and mitigation measures to prevent or minimize these adverse outcomes. This might include implementing robust containment procedures, developing emergency response plans, and providing adequate training to personnel. The core principle is to anticipate and manage potential environmental harm before it occurs, thereby safeguarding the environment and ensuring compliance with relevant environmental legislation and regulations. such as those pertaining to hazardous waste management or water discharge permits. Question 23. An industrial manufacturing firm operating in a region with stringent wastewater discharge regulations, including specific permissible limits for heavy metals and chemical oxygen demand, COD, is transitioning to ISO 14001-2015. The firm has historically relied on manual record-keeping for its effluent monitoring data and has a general awareness of the relevant national environmental protection laws. During the transition, what is the most critical step the organization must undertake to effectively manage its compliance obligations as per Clause 6? 1. 3 of the Standard. Option A. Conduct a one-time training session for all employees on the company's environmental policy and the importance of regulatory adherence. Option B. Establish a systematic process for identifying, accessing, and understanding all applicable legal and other environmental requirements, and integrate this information into operational controls and monitoring procedures. Option C. Update the Environmental Management System Manual to include a chapter on environmental law, without necessarily linking it to specific operational activities. Option D. Focus solely on meeting the most commonly cited environmental regulations and assume that compliance with these will implicitly cover other, less frequent requirements. Correct answer is B. Establish a systematic process for identifying, accessing, and understanding all applicable legal and other environmental requirements, and integrate this information into operational controls and monitoring procedures. Explanation: the transition to ISO 14001-2015 requires organizations to identify, have access to, and understand their compliance obligations. This clause, specifically 6.1.3, emphasizes the need to determine how these obligations apply to the organization's environmental aspects. Compliance obligations encompass legal requirements, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act in the United States, or REACH and the Water Framework Directive in Europe, and other requirements to which the organization subscribes, e.g., voluntary industry codes, agreements with local authorities, or customer requirements. The standard mandates that an organization must maintain knowledge of its compliance obligations and how they apply to its products, services, and activities. Furthermore, it requires the organization to regularly evaluate its compliance status. The core of this requirement is not just listing obligations, but understanding their practical application to the organization's specific environmental context and operational processes. This involves integrating the management of compliance obligations into the overall environmental management system, ensuring that controls are in place to meet them, and that evidence of compliance is maintained. The transition process necessitates a thorough review of existing legal and other requirements, updating internal procedures, and training personnel to ensure ongoing adherence. Question 24. Consider a multinational manufacturing firm, Eco-Precision Industries, operating in multiple jurisdictions with varying environmental regulations, such as stringent water discharge limits in country X and stricter air emission standards in country Y. Internally, the company faces challenges with outdated process technology in its older facilities and a recent mandate from its parent company to achieve carbon neutrality by 2035. Which of the following most accurately reflects the comprehensive scope of internal and external issues that Eco-Precision Industries must consider when transitioning to an ISO 14001-2015 compliant EMS? Option A. The specific water discharge permits in country X, the air emission permits in country Y, the company's financial reports, and the availability of skilled labor. Option B. The diverse regulatory landscapes across its operating countries, the global commitment to climate action influencing corporate strategy, the technological obsolescence in older manufacturing plants, and the internal drive for carbon neutrality. Option C. The company's marketing strategies, the brand perception of its products, the employee satisfaction surveys unrelated to environmental practices, and the local community's general opinion of industrial activity. Option D. The global economic downturn affecting raw material prices, the company's internal IT infrastructure, the specific ISO 14001-2015 clause requirements for documentation, and the personal environmental concerns of the CEO. The correct answer is B. The diverse regulatory landscapes across its operating countries, the global commitment to climate action influencing corporate strategy, the technological obsolescence in older manufacturing plants, and the internal drive for carbon neutrality. Explanation: the determination of internal and external issues is a foundational step in establishing an effective environmental management system, EMS, according to ISO 14001-2015. Clause 4. 1. Understanding the organization and its context mandates that an organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome of its EMS. External issues can encompass a broad range of factors originating outside the organization's direct control. These include the socio-cultural environment, technological advancements, economic conditions, political and legal frameworks, such as environmental regulations like the EU's REACH or National Clean Air Acts, and the natural environment itself, climate change, resource availability. Internal issues, conversely, relate to the organization's own operation, resources, culture, and capabilities. Examples include organizational structure, employee competencies, technological infrastructure, financial resources, and internal policies. The process of identifying these issues is not a one-time event but an ongoing activity. It requires a systematic approach, often involving stakeholder engagement, market analysis, regulatory monitoring, and internal audits. The identified issues directly inform the scope of the EMS, the establishment of environmental objectives, and the development of strategies to manage environmental aspects and impacts. For instance, a new government regulation on emissions would be an external issue that might necessitate a review of internal processes related to air pollution control. Similarly, a lack of employee awareness regarding waste segregation would be an internal issue that needs to be addressed through training and communication. The intent is to understand the operating context to ensure the EMS is relevant, robust, and capable of achieving its environmental performance goals. Question 25. Consider a manufacturing facility transitioning its environmental management system to align with ISO 14001-2015. The organization has identified that a critical success factor for the new standard is ensuring all personnel, from shop floor operators to senior management, understand their specific roles in achieving environmental objectives and the consequences of failing to adhere to new procedures related to waste segregation and energy consumption monitoring. Which of the following strategies would most effectively demonstrate that persons doing work under the organization's control are aware of the environmental policy, significant environmental aspects, and their contribution to the effectiveness of the EMS, particularly in relation to the new standards requirements? Option A. Integrating environmental responsibilities and performance metrics related to significant environmental aspects into job descriptions and performance appraisal systems, alongside targeted training modules that link individual tasks to the overall environmental policy and the benefits of improved environmental performance. Option B. Relying on departmental managers to communicate the environmental policy and relevant aspects to their teams through informal briefings, assuming that employees will naturally understand their contributions to the EMS. Option C. Conducting a one-time comprehensive training session for all employees covering the updated environmental policy and general environmental awareness, followed by the prominent display of environmental posters throughout the facility. Option D. Establishing a dedicated environmental awareness intranet page that hosts all relevant documents, including the environmental policy, aspect registers, and training materials, with an expectation that employees will proactively access and review this information. The correct answer is A. Integrating environmental responsibilities and performance metrics related to significant environmental aspects into job descriptions and performance appraisal systems, alongside targeted training modules that link individual tasks to the overall environmental policy and the benefits of improved environmental performance. Explanation. The core of this question lies in understanding the requirements of ISO 14001-2015 regarding awareness. Clause 7. 3. Awareness mandates that persons doing work under the organization's control shall be aware of the environmental policy, their significant environmental aspects and potential environmental impacts associated with their work, their contribution to the effectiveness of the environmental management system, EMS, including the benefits of improved environmental performance and the implications of not conforming with the EMS requirements. The question probes how an organization ensures this awareness is effectively communicated and understood, particularly in the context of a transition to a new standard. A robust awareness program goes beyond mere dissemination of information. It requires mechanisms to confirm comprehension and application. Considering the transition to ISO 14001-2015, which emphasizes operational control and life cycle thinking, the most comprehensive approach would involve integrating these awareness elements into the daily operations and responsibilities of personnel. This includes ensuring that job roles and responsibilities are clearly defined with respect to environmental aspects and impacts, and that performance evaluations consider environmental contributions. This fosters a culture of environmental responsibility. Other options, while potentially part of an awareness strategy, do not as directly or comprehensively address the requirement for ensuring that individuals understand their specific contribution to the EMS's effectiveness and the implications of nonconformance within the operational context. For instance, simply displaying the policy or conducting periodic general training might not guarantee deep understanding or link individual actions to overall EMS performance. The emphasis on integrating awareness into operational controls and performance feedback is key for demonstrating conformity with the standard's intent. Question 26. A multinational manufacturing firm, Veridian Dynamics, is undergoing its transition to ISO 14001-2015. The company operates in several countries, each with varying environmental legislation and societal expectations regarding industrial emissions. Internally, Veridian Dynamics faces challenges with outdated pollution control technology at one of its key facilities, and a recent employee survey indicated a low level of environmental awareness among production line staff. Furthermore, a significant competitor has recently invested heavily in renewable energy sources for its operations. Considering the organization's context, as mandated by ISO 14001-2015, which of the following best represents the dynamic interplay of internal and external issues that Veridian Dynamics must proactively address for a successful EMS transition? Option A. Veridian Dynamics should concentrate solely on internal operational inefficiencies and resource allocation, as these are the only controllable elements within the organization's direct purview for EMS implementation. Option B. The competitor's investment in renewable energy is an isolated external event that has minimal bearing on Veridian Dynamics' internal environmental management system requirements beyond a superficial awareness. Option C. The need to upgrade pollution control technology and enhance employee training internal issues must be considered alongside the evolving regulatory frameworks and competitors' sustainability initiatives, external issues, to inform strategic environmental objectives. Option D. The primary focus should be on external factors like international environmental treaties and global market demand for green products, as these dictate the organization's environmental performance requirements. The correct answer is C. The need to upgrade pollution control technology and enhance employee training, internal issues, must be considered alongside the evolving regulatory frameworks and competitors' sustainability initiatives, external issues, to inform strategic environmental objectives. Explanation. The core of understanding an organization's context under ISO 14001-2015 involves identifying and considering both internal and external issues that can affect the organization's ability to achieve its intended environmental outcomes. These issues are not static and can evolve over time, necessitating a dynamic approach to their identification and review. Internal issues relate to the organization's own operations, culture, resources, and capabilities, such as its technological infrastructure, employee awareness, or financial stability. External issues encompass the broader environment in which the organization operates, including market conditions, regulatory landscapes, technological advancements, social expectations, and the natural environment. The standard requires that these identified issues be monitored and reviewed. This continuous monitoring ensures that the environmental management system remains relevant and effective in addressing changing circumstances. For instance, a new environmental regulation enacted by a national agency, an external issue, might necessitate a review of the organization's waste management procedures, an internal aspect. Similarly, A shift in consumer preference towards sustainably sourced materials, an external issue, could prompt the organization to reevaluate its supply chain practices, an internal process. The emphasis is on a proactive and adaptive approach to environmental management, ensuring that the organization's strategic direction and the scope of its environmental management system are informed by a comprehensive understanding of its operating environment. Question 27. Consider a mid-sized chemical manufacturing company, Chem Corp, that handles significant volumes of regulated hazardous waste and supplies products to international markets. During its transition to ISO 14001-2015, Chem Corp is defining the scope and context of its environmental management system. Which of the following groups of interested parties and their associated requirements are most critically relevant to Chem Corp's initial ISO 14001-2015 transition planning, particularly concerning legal compliance and market access? Option A. National environmental regulatory agencies imposing specific waste treatment and emission standards, and international customers requiring adherence to REACH registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals regulations. Option B. Local neighborhood associations advocating for reduced noise pollution, and internal employee unions demanding enhanced safety training related to non-hazardous material handling. Option C. Competitor companies seeking to benchmark environmental performance metrics, and industry trade associations providing general best practice guidelines for waste minimization. Option D. Financial investors seeking to understand the company's long-term sustainability reporting metrics, and academic researchers studying the impact of industrial emissions on local biodiversity. The correct answer is A. National environmental regulatory agencies imposing specific waste treatment and emission standards, and international customers requiring adherence to REACH registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals regulations. Explanation. The ISO 14001-2015 standard, specifically in Clause 4.2, requires an organization to determine the interested parties that are relevant to its environmental management system and their requirements. Interested parties are individuals or groups that can be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by an organization's environmental performance. This determination is a foundational step in establishing the scope and context of the EMS. The standard emphasizes that these requirements must be considered when establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving the EMS. For a manufacturing firm dealing with hazardous waste disposal, regulatory bodies, like the Environmental Protection Agency or equivalent local authorities, are critical interested parties whose legal and regulatory requirements must be identified and met. Local community groups concerned about potential pollution, employees who are directly exposed to environmental risks, and customers who demand environmentally responsible products also represent significant interested parties whose expectations, though not always legally binding, influence the organization's environmental performance and reputation. The process of identifying these parties and their requirements is iterative and should be integrated into the strategic planning and operational activities of the organization. It's not about simply listing them, but understanding the nature and significance of their environmental concerns and expectations to effectively manage environmental aspects and impacts. Question 28. Consider a manufacturing firm undergoing its transition to ISO 14001-2015. The newly appointed environmental coordinator, while knowledgeable about environmental regulations and the standards requirements, lacks the explicit authority to unilaterally halt production lines when an immediate, observable environmental noncompliance is detected, such as an unauthorized discharge exceeding permitted limits. Instead, the coordinator must first seek approval from the production manager, who may prioritize production schedules. Which aspect of the ISO 14001-2015 transition is most critically undermined by this organizational structure concerning the effective management of environmental responsibilities? Option A. Establishing a comprehensive set of environmental performance indicators to track progress against objectives. Option B. Ensuring that environmental responsibilities and authorities are clearly assigned, communicated, and understood throughout the organization. Option C. Implementing a robust internal audit program to assess the effectiveness of the EMS. Option D. Developing a detailed life cycle perspective for all products and services offered by the organization. Correct answer is B. Ensuring that environmental responsibilities and authorities are clearly assigned, communicated, and understood throughout the organization. Explanation. The transition to ISO 14001-2015 emphasizes the need for clear definition of roles, responsibilities, and authorities within an organization's environmental management system, EMS. Clause 5. 3. Organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities mandates that top management must ensure these are assigned, communicated, and understood throughout the organization. This is crucial for effective implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the EMS. For an organization to effectively transition and maintain compliance, particularly concerning its legal obligations and environmental performance, the designated environmental representative or manager must possess the authority to influence operational decisions that impact environmental aspects. This includes the ability to halt nonconforming activities, allocate resources for environmental initiatives, and ensure that environmental considerations are integrated into business processes. Without this delegated authority, the environmental manager's role becomes advisory rather than instrumental in driving compliance and performance. For instance, if a new process is introduced that has significant environmental implications, the environmental manager needs the authority to ensure that the necessary controls are in place before operations commence, or to stop operations if those controls are inadequate, rather than merely suggesting improvements. This proactive stance is fundamental to preventing pollution and ensuring adherence to regulations like the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, which require stringent operational controls. Question 29. When an organization is undertaking a transition to an ISO 14001-2015 compliant environmental management system, which of the following statements best reflects the foundational principles and scope of the broader ISO 14000 family of standards as they inform this transition? Option A. The ISO 14000 family is exclusively focused on setting mandatory, legally binding environmental performance targets that all certified organizations must achieve, irrespective of their industry or geographical location, as stipulated by international regulatory bodies. Option B. The ISO 14000 family provides a comprehensive suite of voluntary standards and guidance documents, including ISO 14001 for EMS requirements and supporting standards like ISO 14004 for implementation guidance, all designed to help organizations systematically manage their environmental interactions and improve environmental performance within their operational context. Option C. The primary purpose of the ISO 14000 family is to dictate specific technological solutions for pollution control and resource conservation, thereby ensuring that all member organizations adopt identical, state-of-the-art environmental protection measures. Option D. The ISO 14000 family is a collection of standards primarily concerned with the financial reporting of environmental liabilities and the auditing of corporate sustainability claims, with little direct relevance to the operational aspects of an environmental management system. The correct answer is B. The ISO 14000 family provides a comprehensive suite of voluntary standards and guidance documents, including ISO 14001 for EMS requirements and supporting standards like ISO 14004 for implementation guidance, all designed to help organizations systematically manage their environmental interactions and improve environmental performance within their operational context. Explanation. The ISO 14000 family of standards is a set of voluntary international standards that provide a framework for organizations to manage their environmental responsibilities. ISO 14001 specifically focuses on the requirements for an environmental management system, EMS. When transitioning to or implementing an EMS based on ISO 14001-2015, organizations must consider various aspects of their operations and interactions with the environment. Understanding the broader ISO 14000 family helps contextualize ISO 14001. For instance, ISO 14004 provides guidance for implementing an EMS, while other standards within the family address specific environmental issues such as life cycle assessment, ISO 14040 series, or environmental performance evaluation. ISO 14031. The core of ISO 14001-2015 lies in its Plan Do Check Act (PDCA) cycle and its emphasis on context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. The standard requires organizations to identify environmental aspects and impacts, establish objectives and targets, implement operational controls, monitor performance, and conduct management reviews. It also mandates compliance with applicable legal and other requirements. The integration of an EMS with other management systems, such as ISO 9001, quality, or ISO 45001, occupational health and safety, is often a strategic consideration for organizations seeking efficiency and synergy. The ISO 14000 family is not a prescriptive standard dictating specific environmental performance levels, but rather a framework for establishing and maintaining an effective EMS. Question 30. Consider a manufacturing company, Ecoform Industries, that has set an objective to reduce its hazardous waste generation by 15% within 2 years, aligning with its commitment to sustainable production practices and compliance with the Basel Convention's principles on transboundary movement of hazardous wastes. What is the most critical component of the plan that Ecoform Industries must develop to ensure the successful achievement of this objective? Option A. A comprehensive communication strategy to inform all stakeholders about the hazardous waste reduction objective and its importance. Option B. A market analysis to identify potential buyers for any byproducts that might be generated as a result of waste reduction efforts. Option C. An updated emergency response plan that includes protocols for handling any accidental spills of hazardous waste during the reduction process. Option D. A detailed action plan specifying the methods for waste reduction, assigned responsibilities for each action, a realistic timeline for implementation, and criteria for measuring progress and final success. The correct answer is D. A detailed action plan specifying the methods for waste reduction, assigned responsibilities for each action, a realistic timeline for implementation, and criteria for measuring progress and final success. Explanation. The planning process for achieving environmental objectives under ISO 14001-2015 involves a systematic approach to ensure these objectives are measurable, relevant, and actionable. This entails identifying the necessary resources, determining responsibilities, establishing timelines, and defining how the results will be evaluated. Specifically, the standard requires the organization to determine what will be done, what resources will be required, who will be responsible, when it will be completed, and how the results will be evaluated. This structured approach ensures that the environmental objectives are not merely aspirational, but are integrated into the organization's operational framework and are supported by concrete actions and accountability. Without a clear plan outlining these critical elements, the achievement of environmental objectives becomes uncertain, and the effectiveness of the environmental management system is compromised. This planning phase is fundamental to demonstrating continual improvement of environmental performance and achieving compliance with relevant environmental legislation, such as regulations pertaining to emissions control or waste management, which are often implicitly or explicitly linked to the achievement of specific environmental objectives.